Hi, I'm Charles Welch. I was born and raised in Northwest Ohio. For nearly 50 years, Toledo has been the place that I call home. The history of Toledo has become one of my passions. Some people say, let the past stay in the past. I say, let the past guide us to the future. Join me on my journey to find out who we were and how we got to be who we are. This is Untold, the hidden stories of Northwest Ohio. Welcome to Untold. I'm your host, Charles Welch. There's a day that will go down in Toledo history as a day that no one would ever forget. That day, June 1st, 1931. And on that day, the banking system in Toledo failed, and all but one bank closed their doors. The bank that stayed open? Toledo Trust, located right behind me. That turn of events would cause a series of consequences that would resonate in Toledo until this day. Joining me to shed some light on this story is my good friend, Timothy Messer-Cruz. He's an author, local professor, and historian. We had a chance to chat about his book that chronicled this time in Toledo history. I hope you're ready for another great story. Timothy Messer-Cruz, it's a pleasure to meet you.
You too, sir.
I have seen your interviews on television, and I am telling you, I did not realize how interesting the banking industry in Toledo is. You know all the stories about everything that happened, and there's one era in particular, and there's a story that I hope you mentioned. I'm not going to mention it yet. I'm going to see if it comes up. But there was a bad day and a lot leading up to that day in the Toledo banking history. Can you tell me about that?
Sure. Well, that day that you're talking about, June 16th, 1931, when the public, most people in Toledo heard that the banks were about to fail. And so they ran downtown, ran to the big banks, their bank books in hand, to try and get out as much money as they could. If you thought about the movie This American Life, when people run on the Bailey Savings and Loan, it's that kind of a scene. People crowding in, trying to get their money. They're panicked. They think the bank is going to close. It's called a bank run. And it's what most economists blame for the worst part of the Great Depression, because the standard thinking is that banks closed because the economy was doing poorly. And like any other business, eventually things get bad enough, you got to go bankrupt, doors close. That's story over. Right. But the real story is actually much darker and much more insidious than that. Okay. Banks failing it's not really like a change in the weather. It's not like a natural event. It's not something that just happens. It's actually the culmination of a lot of poor decisions and criminal intent.
I just did, but they said you left. This is a pickle, George. This is a pickle.
All right, now what happened? How did it start?
Well, how does a thing like this ever start? All I know is the bank called our loan.
When?
About an hour ago, I handed over all our cash.
All of it?
Every cent of it, and still was less than we owed them.
Holy mackerel.
And then I got scared, George, and closed the doors.
Well before the public ever hears of any trouble in the bank, the insiders, the bank board of directors, the bank owners, the managers, they know what's going on. They can see the writing on the wall. They can see that the bank is headed for a bad end. And they all have their personal investments in the bank too. They've been using the bank as their private piggy bank, if you will, for decades, for their own businesses, for their own personal loans. They have lots of their own money tied up in those banks. And when they see that the bank is getting close to the end, they start pulling their money out first. When I first came to Toledo in 1995, I was really struck by just the geography of the city. The city struck me as beautiful, but odd in a way. And the oddness of it was that it seemed to me odd for a city of this size to have cornfields
Really?
in the city limits.
Yeah.
I'd never seen that before.
Absolutely.
And in fact, I live in Toledo, and not a quarter mile from my house, there's probably a 100-acre cornfield. I'm like, wait, this is a city. Why are there cornfields in the city? I finally answered that question. And this is because during those boom times of the 1920s, the very bankers and directors and owners of these banks that failed also owned real estate companies. They were speculating in real estate, and they were plotting out lot after lot, and then they were offering loans. They were getting their bank to provide loans to the borrower to build houses and to buy their lots. And of course, this is what we call in economics an interlocking directorate. So the real estate company and the bank essentially are run by the same person. The real estate company is using the bank as its private pool of funds to get real estate going in the city. Well, this became an excessive business. By 1925, these real estate companies had plotted out enough lots in the city to house 1 million people. There are thousands and thousands of subdivisions that have been plotted out that were never built upon. Today, those are the cornfields. And this is one of the reasons that they eventually failed. They had all this paper all these loans that they'd given on these houses and lots because they were interlocked with the real estate companies. And then when the Depression began, when people began losing their jobs, or when the economy turned down just a little bit, suddenly those loans were non-performing, and the banks were running on such thin margins that even a small number of non-performing loans doomed them.
Were there criminal charges filed on people who did certain things during that particular time period?
So that was a big question. Everybody presumed at the time that what the bankers did must have been illegal. I mean, in fact, people in Toledo began calling them banksters, like gangster.
And you know, when we were talking, I saw your book, when I saw banksters, I'm like, I've never heard of a bankster.
Yeah.
So that's where that came from.
So they called them banksters, which is bank plus gangster. And people assumed there must be there must be a law. There got to be a law, you know, that kind of attitude. Well, there was a state investigation of their actions that went on for about a year. Out of that state investigation, eventually the local DA charged 6 bankers with 48 counts of various violations of banking law in Ohio. So eventually there was a prosecution. But Ohio banking law was written by bankers. It was written in a way that it wouldn't take a brilliant lawyer to figure out a loophole in most of these laws.
I have some news for you, folks. I was just talking to old man Potter, and he's guaranteed cash payments to the bank. The bank's going to reopen next week.
But, George, I got my money here. Did he guarantee this place?
Well, no, Charlie, I didn't even ask him. We don't need Potter over here.
And I'll take mine now.
No, but you're thinking of this place all wrong, as if I had the money back in a safe. The money's not here. Well, your money's in Joe's house. That's right next to yours. And in the Kennedy house, and Mrs. Maitland's house, and 100 others. You're lending them the money to build, and then they're going to pay it back to you as best they can. Now, what are you going to do, foreclose on them?
I got $242 in here, and $242 isn't going to break anybody.
So for decades leading up to this rupture, when 5 of the 6 largest banks in Toledo closed all on the same day. Same day. The largest bank failure in the Great Depression in America. That day in June is when the Great Depression really became real for most people. For most people, what was the crisis of the Depression was the day that they could not get their money out of the bank, that their life savings, their business assets are frozen or lost. That's when the reality of the deep crisis of the 1930s really hit most people. It wasn't the stock market crash in 1929. Most people would think of the 1929 stock Black Friday as being the start of the Great Depression. No, for most people that was just another headline in the news. It didn't affect most people. Most people, the majority of people, didn't really feel the pinch until the banks closed. And that was that day in 1931 here in Toledo.
So here we are on Monday morning. The weekend has passed, the banks are closed, and the rumors are going around. I want to put myself in the shoes of the people, the Toledoans. You know, I'm glad I said that. It's not people, these are Toledoans. These are people just like you and I. They're the residents, the backbone of the community. So I'm an average Toledoan. Here it is. I wake up on Monday morning. I go down. Now, is it just about everyone who's going to the bank? Like every citizen, or is it,
thousands of people.
Thousands of people.
I mean, it was enough people downtown that the police eventually had to block off the streets. There was no traffic allowed downtown. There was so many people crowding the streets that they couldn't allow cars down there.
Really? And so, and I'm sure it's not an organized line.
It's not an organized line.
I'm sure it's kind of an angry mob.
Here's the interesting thing. It's not angry. It's actually pretty orderly that day. And I've been trying to think about that myself. Like, you could imagine this evolving into some kind of bigger riot situation. Yeah. But I think the explanation is that there's just this deep shock that not just one bank has failed, but the entire banking industry has failed. I mean, you look around and you see thousands of other people in the street, all in the same state of panic. It's just a shock. And I think in that state of shock, people didn't know how to react. They didn't know what to do. But that moment of shock does pass. Okay. Because what happens is that over the next year, from the summer of 31 to the summer of 32, information begins trickling out that these banks didn't just fail, they were looted from the inside out. And the anger began to build. And by the next summer, events came together where you had that anger combined with leadership. In this case, it was the labor movement that was organizing workers. It just so happened they were organizing workers at the Auto Light Company, which was owned by Clement Miniger, who was the owner of the largest failed bank in Toledo. So these two stories begin to interlock. The labor movement and the anger towards the banks all could focus on this one person, Clement Miniger. And in the summer of 1932, those two things exploded into the worst riot in Toledo history that created such conditions of chaos that the Ohio National Guard was called out on their largest deployment since the Civil War. 3 days of rioting, 2 men were killed, and out of that event, the UAW was born. But it all goes back to the failed bank. So that's kind of a delayed response. It took a year, but then you had really what was not just a labor strike, it was an urban uprising expressing deep, deep resentments at the power structure that had created these conditions for everybody.
Well, I got $300 here, George.
All right, now, Ed, what'll it take until the bank opens? What do you need?
Well, I suppose $20?
$20. Now you're talking.
Oh.
Thanks, Ed. That's fine. All right, now, Miss Thompson, how much do you want?
But it's your own money,
Now,
George.
don't mind about that. How much do you want now?
I can get along with 20, all right.
$20, fine.
And I'll sign the paper.
You don't have to sign anything. I know you pay when you can. That's okay.
The banks were kind of playing this game where they wanted to try and limit the withdrawals but not suspend them. So they wanted to give some people as much as they could, but not actually close their doors, because that would invite that invites bankruptcy. Right. So they're trying to hang on. Okay. And for the most part, most of the banks are unsuccessful at doing that. Of the 6 big money center banks downtown, 5 of them can't sustain the day. They close their doors before the end of the day. Okay. They don't have enough assets in the vault to do it. There's one bank, however, Toledo Trust Bank. It was the only federally regulated bank in Toledo. All the rest were state regulated. Toledo Trust went for federal regulation. And this proved to be a very good business choice for them, because when the crisis hit on that morning, they were able to call up the Federal Reserve in Cleveland and say, we need cash bad. We want cash now. And being a member of the Federal Reserve Bank in Cleveland requisitioned 2 armored vehicles and just filled them with cash. Sent them speeding down Highway 2 towards Toledo at such a breakneck pace that the first one actually got in an auto accident. They both had to stop, and then armed sheriffs with shotguns had to hold a line while they moved the money from one armored truck to the other. And then that one tore into Toledo, and when it arrived at Toledo Trust, Henry Thompson, the owner of Toledo Trust, gave the order: don't take the money to the vault, stack it up in the cages so people can see all the money that we have.
Oh, okay. So the people who are there thinking,
they
oh my
be
goodness.
Reassured. Like, look at all this money. Why do I have to be worried?
Right. There's a big stack of cash right there. Everything is okay.
That's one thing. We know he did that for sure. That's recorded. There's another rumor of something else that he did. We're not sure if it's true or not.
Tell me that, because I think this might be what I'm thinking of.
So there's a rumor that he also gave the order for the janitor to go in the basement and stoke up the furnace with coal. It's June, so when you stoke up the furnace in June, it makes the place very hot. So he made the lobby uncomfortably hot so no one would want to wait in line. That's a rumor.
But we're not sure if that's true or not.
We're not. No, there's no documentation for
That's
it. Being
the
a
story
historian,
that I
I like
heard.
documentation. There's just the local lore about that.
In my head, I'm going to say that that's true, just because I need
so
for that to
good.
be true, because it's such a good story.
Yeah.
And when I think of this story, and we've been focusing, well, somewhat, at least in my head, I've been focused on just, if it were me, my money's in the bank, I want to get my money. But when the banks fail, there are other things that happen because the banks fail. There are other casualties of these things happening
Exactly.
in the cities, such as
businesses fail.
Yeah.
So perfectly solvent businesses who are making a profit and doing fine
Yeah.
failed because all of their assets were in the bank. So the unemployment rate in Toledo skyrockets as a direct result of the bank failures, not just because of the overall economy. And by 1932, by many accounts, Toledo had the worst unemployment in the nation. It was certainly made much, much worse than even the Great Depression norm by this bank failure. I mean, it got so bad that the city of Toledo was absolutely broke. They couldn't afford to repair their fire engines. And every few months, they'd have to take another fire engine out of service because it was out of repair. And they couldn't afford to fix it, and fires would burn.
what happened to those bank books that were essentially the only record of how much was going back and forth? What happened to those bank books at the end of the day?
Well, private individuals could keep them after they made their claims. I mean, if you showed the court, or you made your claim. So there are some in private hands still, bank books from those times. But most of the bank records, including the more important ones, the internal records, the board of directors minutes, the daily accounts, all the correspondence, all those materials were eventually burned at the order of the local courts. So once the prosecutions of the bankers were concluded, the very last request of the defense, in other words, the bankers' own lawyers, were that since my client has been acquitted, we requested the court burn all the records. And this is a kind of odd request, I guess, but they were granted in Toledo. So all the bank records were destroyed.
I don't understand what the argument could have been, other than since we're all done, it's all said and done.
The argument was proprietary business secrets,
Oh, okay.
which they certainly were.
Yeah.
Because
you're
there
right.
was evidence of many other crimes in those details as well.
So the buildings themselves, from that horrible Monday when things all started, some of them still exist in Toledo.
Many of them do.
Many of them
yes.
still downtown Toledo,
Yeah.
and people can walk past them, and
That's right.
they're the exact same steps that the citizens, tried to get their livelihood back.
That's right.
And stood. Wow, this is so. I got to tell you, I'm a little. I didn't expect to be. The word I'm looking for is. I'm just bothered. I'm upset at some of the things that I've learned today from talking to you, because I would not like to see the human spirit or things like that, not to be that kind of bad or that dirty, but Toledo's still here.
It is still here.
We have come back, and we are we trust banks again.
That's right.
I got to tell you, I know that you have more stories. And I cannot wait
I have
until
a basket
we talk.
full, yes.
I want to pick through every single story in that basket and talk about so many things. And I don't feel bad that I don't know as much about Toledo as you do, because I get to talk to you and learn so many things about the city. And maybe next time we'll get out and we'll walk around a little
That'd be
bit
great.
and see
I would
some
really
things.
enjoy that.
I've got to tell you, thank you so much for stopping by. Can I call you Tim?
You may.
Tim, thank you very much.
Thank
I
you,
appreciate
Charlie.
it, man. It's been awesome.
You bet.
I sure hope you enjoyed this episode of Untold. Just imagine waking up and finding out that all the banks have closed and that your money was gone. See, I don't think I can do it, but Toledoans did, and so did many others across the nation. And with that, we're going to close this chapter on the story of Toledo. I want to thank you for joining me, and I hope you learned something of value about our community. For BCAN, I'm Charles Welch, and this is Untold, the hidden stories of Northwest Ohio.
Untold, the hidden stories of Northwest Ohio, is brought to you by Holy Toledo History, an archive of stories dedicated to Toledo's past. Log on now at holytoledohistory.com. Your time is now. Realtor Charles Welch will handle your every need. Just choose Charlie.